Being the bad guy is fun, isn't it? I mean, not in real life, of course, where there are all these pesky repercussions for all of your actions and jail sentences that just have to be served. But you know what? In video games, you can basically be a right dick without any of the existential guilt. Now, true, you can also be the hero and save the day, but that's just so boring when you consider the alternative. Why not capture people in Fable and sacrifice them to a comically Machiavellian cult, or act like an animal in GTA? Or why not play a game that lets you be an absolute bastard from start to finish? Usually, when you play video games, even those that cast you in a negative light always end up siding with the light side. But not these games, because these let you delve deep into the barrel of rotten apples and pull out some absolute stinkers. So with this in mind, I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games where you are definitely the bad guy. Oh, and before we begin, the original article that this was based on had hatred as number 10, but I ain't going to talk about that absolute toilet, so instead, number 10, Lord of the Rings, Conquest. Have you ever watched the Lord of the Rings films and thought, nah, sorry pal, the orcs and flying dragon demons would have definitely won these fights? If so, I totally feel you, my friend, and I can tell you this for certain, the Lord of the Rings Conquest is the game for you. Well, I mean, technically it's just an okay game that was basically Star Wars Battlefront with a high fantasy reskin, and it was clunkier than an oliphant with platform shoes on. However, it did have one massive saving grace, and that was letting you play as the armies of Mordor in the evil campaign. The Rise of Sauron, as it's known, allowed you to command hordes of filthy, wretched orcs and goblins as you fought back against the shiny forces of good. And not only do you get to rewrite the history of the books and films by winning all of the major battles and crushing the legendary heroes that stood in your way, but there is an utterly delicious moment where at the end of this campaign, you get to destroy the Shire. And I mean properly destroy it. You get to burn down its houses, you get to annihilate the local population, and to top it all off, when Gandalf makes his last stand, you get to be Sauron himself and absolutely mash his face with your mace. You will be cackling from start to finish and just wish that you could play more of this evil campaign. Number 9, God of War 2005. While it's fair to say that the recent soft reboot of the God of War franchise made a major attempt to rehabilitate protagonist Kratos, as depicted in the original run of the games, he's a real piece of work, alright. In the latest game, he acknowledges to his son that he's killed a lot of people that didn't deserve it, and it was a past that he would love to forget. And while it's true that many of the gods that he was fighting were bigger assholes than himself, he was never ever able to take the higher moral ground. Even if you let him off the hook for being manipulated into killing his own wife and daughter in the first game, Kratos still routinely killed innocents without a care in the world, especially Poseidon's princess in God of War 3, whose body he used to open a door, resulting in her eventually being crushed to death. And strangely enough, in the second and third games, we lost all semblance of morality from the man, as his acts of terror and violence far outweighed the justification he had for taking on the gods head on. In short, he might be human, but there's little humanity left inside him, which makes the latest installment all the more breathtaking at this reversal of character. Number 8, GoldenEye Rogue Agent. This is an especially enjoyable entry because the overwhelming majority of James Bond games cast the player, funnily enough, in the role of 007 himself. But GoldenEye Rogue Agent boldly placed players in the shoes of GoldenEye, a disgraced ex-MI6 agent who was dismissed for his unconventional methods, and ends up recruited by the villainous Goldfinger to assassinate another classic Bond antagonist, Dr. No. Though precious little of Rogue Agent can be taken seriously in the context of Bond lore, it's definitely a fun what-if scenario, and one elevated by the player's ability to use their golden eye tech to see through walls, hack equipment, deflect bullets, and generate a magnetic field to blast enemies to their doom. It's pure over-the-top action that will leave you smiling ear to ear. It's possibly a shame that there's no mustache twirl button for how evil things can get, but you know what? We'll take what we can get when it comes to living out being the baddest Bond villain you can play as. While outside of Oddjob in GoldenEye 64, because if you picked him, you were just plain bad, because it was like the sense of you're a bad bloody friend. Number 7, Overlord. I mean, you can't get much more evil than actually playing as a bona fide Lord of Destruction who is just seeking to enslave the world under their iron-fisted rule, can you? And that's just the power fantasy that Overlord lets you indulge in. And the best thing about this is that it really nails how much of a cad you are by barely making the player control the Overlord themselves and instead delegating all of the fighting and action to his numerous minions. They're expendable after all, so why not fling them into the blades of those trying to oppose you? You gotta keep that evil armor free of viscera, right? The heroes of this world are warped versions of well-known classics, but the evil that you exude from your blackened stare is something so over the top that it becomes kind of like a pantomime. I mean, to give it context, there's a level in the second game where you can club baby seals to death. Baby seals. It is a brutal moment that is so ridiculous that you can't help but laugh at what is essentially something so utterly horrible. So yeah, if you've ever wanted to be a dick and manage a group of peons, then you know what, come work here, first off, and also play Overlord 1 and 2, as it is a guilty pleasure from start to finish. Number 6, Jaws Unleashed. You can certainly argue that sharks weren't really seen as bad at all until Steven Spielberg's Jaws created a global moral panic centered around the safety of the world's beaches and the animal's supposed bloodthirsty nature. And though the first stab at the Jaws game on the NES cast the player as a human hero, 2006's Jaws Unleashed realized how much cooler it'd be to play as the apparent villain of the Jaws world, the damn shark itself. The game allows the player to roam free through the ocean depths, annihilating humans and animals alike and earning upgrades to their murderous faculties in the process. That's right, you upgrade a shark. Why are you still watching this? You need to play this now. Even accepting society's general misguided hatred of sharks, the fact that this game literally encourages you to eat innocent people probably means that you're most definitely the bad guy, and it's never been more fun. Number 5, Grand Theft Auto 5. The Grand Theft Auto series effectively built its brand on demented wish fulfillment by allowing players to control a cast of morally bankrupt people who will murder anyone in sight in the pursuit of material gain. This reached its apex in Grand Theft Auto 5, for while 2 of the game's 3 protagonists, Michael and Franklin, are arguably somewhat sympathetic despite their obvious moral failings, the same can't be said for Trevor Phillips. This psychotic, self-involved maniac is effectively a self-insert for the player's basest and most savage desires, and the devs even hinted that Trevor was the manifestation of their fan base, and so just let him loose on the world to cause utter mayhem. Trevor is such an evil character simply because he has no care nor want to respect the lives of anyone else, and yet he's become one of the most popular protagonists of the franchise simply because he caters to the ineffable need within the player base to kill and cause chaos. I mean, if the mirror is being held up to society here, it's not an image that we like to look at for too long, but you know what? It's fun while it lasts. Number 4, Kane and Lynch. The Kane and Lynch games present players with 2 of the most detestable protagonists of any AAA franchise from the last 20 years, and that is saying something. The title characters are 2 vicious criminals who will murder just about anyone who gets in their way, and despite the series' attempt to make them mildly sympathetic, like introducing that Kane has a daughter and that Lynch is extremely mentally ill, it's tough to shake just how overpoweringly terrible the 2 men are in the actions they commit, and also at how it paints those suffering from mental illness as violent psychopaths. And this is even before you add in that Kane stole from his former partners and that Lynch is also a drug addict. It got so bad that review outlets for both games commented on how horrible the pair were and how no one enjoyed playing as them. Even with the prolonged attempts to humanize them, it's almost impossible to feel anything but resentment as you play through more gore and violence. If ever there was a game that allowed you to play definitely as the bad guys but make you want to be a saint afterwards, this is it. Number 3, Destroy All Humans. The Destroy All Humans games see the player take control of Crypto, an alien who comes to Earth to harvest DNA from humans in order to ensure the survival of his own race. Unsurprisingly, given the game's title, harvesting DNA is hardly a harmless process, and the player is outfitted with an eccentric array of weapons in order to wreak havoc on Earth, allowing them to burn, disintegrate, and even anally probe those poor Earthlings who are just trying to go about living their lives. In all honesty, It's a game that pretty much details what would actually happen to us should we be invaded, aka run around clueless while the media make bank off reporting on the events. You're able to cause property damage on a biblical scale, and though the game's tone is thoroughly tongue-in-cheek, it's still pretty hilarious and grim to watch brains and spines fly all over the place. And despite playing as this alien menace, I can't wait for the remaster that's coming out this year. It's gonna be gross. Number 2, Rampage. The Rampage games were basically what I imagine having kids is like, a series of little monsters destroying everything society holds dear with little to no care, although maybe less eating of people whole though. The goal of these titles was to literally level all the buildings in your vicinity while munching people like they were Skittles, and if anyone gave you any guff about it, you'd just squash them into the ground like a fleshy tent peg. And yet, while these creatures might all be cutesy, they are most definitely the bad guys. After all, these are cities full of people who've never hurt you, so you're just an asshole for coming in and smashing up their reasonably priced homes. In fact, so evil were the monsters that it presented a bit of a problem for the recent movie adaptation, which, in order to get the audience on side, transformed Gorilla George from a carnage-loving monster into The Rock's well-meaning oversized pet. It's a bit of a downgrade if you ask me. And number 1, Dungeon Keeper. Dungeon Keeper is a legendary strategy game where the player builds and manages a dungeon with the intent of preventing heroes from breaching it while at the same time making sure that other dungeon keepers are put out of business. What really sets Dungeon Keeper apart from other god games is basically how deliciously demented its sense of humor is, namely how you're not so subtly encouraged to torture, murder or steal from anyone who opposes you and even abuse your own minions to make them work faster. There's a deep-seated cruelty to the bad deeds on offer here that's kind of missing from most other games on this list, because you're effectively given permission to put your victims through the prolonged wringer of suffering rather than simply wipe them out. It definitely has never been better to be so bad. Well, except for when EA brought the franchise back and put microtransactions and paywalls everywhere. Now that, my friends, is truly evil, and we didn't like it one bit. And there we go, those were 10 video games where you are definitely the bad guy. I hope that you enjoyed that, my friends, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. If you want to chat to me about video games, films, TV, wrestling, comics, and more, you can do so at RetroJ with a 0 over on Twitter. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. We detailed a lot of games today that were about you playing as the villain, and trust me, sometimes you can indeed be a villain in your own mind. But I'm just saying, you can cut yourself some slack. It is okay to forgive yourself for mistakes that you might have made in the past, and it is definitely okay to take a break when things are getting you down. Remember, with the support of friends, family, and professionals in the support industry, you don't need to be a villain to yourself. You can help yourself and be the hero that I know you are. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome, never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.